My dad was 32 at the time, and he was the one on that Monday morning walked in and found them. So he came in to check to see how they were. Hey, good morning. And when he opened the door, he could see my grandfather's feet in the kitchen. So you think about a guy that's 32 years old that's never lived more than a block away from his parents, walks in and finds them both brutally, savagely murdered. You can take a picture of him the day before and then a picture probably 2 weeks later, and you never know it's the same person.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Murdered in their home, the brutal killing of Edwin and Bessie Morris, part 1 of 3. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. I'm Wendy, and we have here with us today Mark Morris. Mark, how are you doing, sir?
Good. How are y'all doing?
We're doing good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
David, how are you?
Doing good. Really, but we've been wanting to sit down with Mark for quite some time.
Couple of years, I think.
A couple years, and
this.
it just takes a while to get everybody's schedules together. And for the people that don't know, is that we met Mark. Mark runs the marina where we kept our boat for
Harrington Marina, the best marina on Harrington Lake.
Exactly, the only marina that doesn't have houses cutting loose when the storm hits. We'll leave it at that.
And good food, the best food on the marina.
There you go.
If you're local, you know that what we're talking about. But anyway, I remember meeting and talking to you, Mark, down at the restaurant down there at the marina, which is some of the best food you'll have in the county. But and how you dropped that on us, and I was like, wow. And that's that small world we live in where you just don't know when you meet people what struggles they've been through, or what their families have been through. So. Welcome. We're really excited about it.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, and I think it's an important story to tell from front to back. There's a lot of dynamics that I think that the people that listen to this show or watch this show are going to find interesting for sure. A lot of questions they'll have in the end, too. So,
Mark, let's just open. Obviously, we're here to talk about the murder of your grandparents, Edwin and Bessie Morris, and they were murdered in June of 1985, June 15, 16, up for debate. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your grandparents?
Sure. It's I always joke with people when they talk about where you're from, and in Kentucky we always say counties. We never say the actual town that we're from. So it's Jackson County, a little town called Greyhawk. And what was cool about our community growing up, you never had to worry about locking doors. You never had to worry about, your neighbors or anything. Everybody took care of each other, watched out for each other. And our grandparents in that area were kind of like the community center. We had a grocery store, we had the local post office, and we had a gas station. So everything kind of in Greyhawk, that's about all there was. So there wasn't a whole lot to do. So everybody kind of knew everybody, kept stuff with everybody. And, they were kind of pillars of the community. And at the time when the murder happened, it was the first double murder in the history of Jackson County. Mm-hmm. So it has a lot of stuff into that way. And then as we dig into it, there'll be some stuff that comes up that kind of makes you question, is that type of way, we always say we should go back and live in the good old days. Well, that was the good old days where you didn't have to worry about stuff and your neighbors took care of things. And that world changed drastically that night.
Sure.
I mean, it made a big difference in our lives and all the families that it affected.
And the community, since they were so
Most definitely. I was 16 at the time. It was my first probably dose of reality. I thought that was the world. And then when the news got involved and everything gets involved, you find out there's a whole other world out there that's not as dreamy as you think it is. Yes. There's stuff that happens in the real world, and then when you go on in life, you meet people that had that and worse happen. And you think, well, it only happened to me. No, it's happened a lot. And it's time. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is to make sure that we keep it current. We're going on this year, it'll be 40 years since it happened, that they've been on death row, and we'll get into it. But for pillars of a community that always try to help people out, if you didn't have the money for the groceries, we'd always make sure we'd take care of it, or they would. If you needed a little extra gas or whatever, that's the type of people they were that would want to help anyone because they came from nothing. We weren't rich. They didn't have a whole lot of money, but they worked hard for their stuff, and they wanted to make sure that they were happy to do.
Happy to share with people.
The good Lord says,
it.
if you give to others, He'll give unto you, and that was their motto they wanted to live by.
I think that's what's important that we'll find on this is that we've worked and will continue to work on some unsolved cases where people wait, and they wait decades, and they don't have it. And in this case, it's solved. And but as far as what we would probably want to agree, the real justice on this, we're going to find out in a little while, is taking decades.
Still taking time.
And so that it makes it so much harder for a family, I think, to metabolize and get through that and the disappointments that brings. What do you know about Bessie and Edwin when they were, how they came up and where they came from? Do you know about when they were young? And
Sure, they both came up there in Jackson County.
Mm-hmm.
They were raised basically what we used to call Mom's house, which is just up the hill from there. Poor, hardworking families, farmers. Had always worked hard for their stuff. We always joked with Granny. It was Papa and Granny is how we always called them, Papa and Granny. Granny was a little bit older, so we always said she handpicked Papa to be the one.
She got her a younger man,
and
didn't she?
got her a younger man. And what was funny about it, from the time they were together, they never spent more than a day apart.
Wow.
Even up until death. And the only time that they were apart in death, and again, that'll come further, is when we had taken them from the funeral home to the graveyard. That was the only time they went side by side as everything went on. So it's a true love story through hardships. I mean, they went through the Depression. My grandfather had multiple heart attacks and strokes. He was a little bigger man. My grandmother, we talked a little bit earlier, had cancer. She lost an eye to cancer. So they had been through quite a bit.
Yes.
There were the 4 kids. One of them, the daughter, was in a car wreck, was in a coma for over a month. Came out of it okay, but I mean, it wasn't a family that didn't have tragedy. We'd had another grocery store in addition to where we were that had burnt down several years prior. And they got over that loss and rebuilt and, was having a good life together, getting to enjoy the fruits of their labor a little bit.
And still relatively young. How old were they when they passed?
68 and 65
So
when they passed away. And then they were 20 and 17.
So that's still young, 68 and 65 by, by many accounts.
It is for sure.
Living their life.
Yeah, they were, even though they'd had a lot of health problems, they were still getting around.
Yeah.
Papa used a cane, but he could still get up and get around and do stuff. And my grandmother, she had a green thumb. In the house that they built for themselves, where the murder took place, there was a sunroom. And that sunroom's where they always stayed. And it was full of flowers and just she could touch anything and make it grow. That was her thing. Wow.
Did you, growing up, I guess you lived nearby them. So you probably spent a lot of time with them. A lot
of time. We had, if you think of a neighborhood, we didn't have a neighborhood. We had a store, and then their house was part of the parking lot. So their driveway was a parking lot to the store, and then we lived in a house right behind it. And so we were within a baseball throw, and not a very good pitcher. You could throw from one house to the other. And until my dad was 32, he'd never lived more than a block away from them.
So these were his parents?
This was my dad's parents. And so, he always said he was a mama's boy, and he truly was. I mean, every morning he'd stop in and check on them on his way to work to see how they were doing, to make sure everything was okay. It was just, that's how family was. My uncle, my dad's oldest brother, lived basically across the street from them. So we had everybody all kind of right there together. So it was a family that, everybody kind of stayed together. I grew up with cousins. In the city now you don't really get that. But back then, your cousins that was your play people. That's who you ran with. That's who you hung out with.
Well, and a lot of things, we're here in Kentucky, for those who don't know, in growing up in those days, there's always Sunday dinner. I'm sure your granny was usually fried chicken, green bean, cornbread.
You go after church and you go head to Granny's straight after that.
Yes, and so that was, I'm sure, a tradition for you all too.
Sure was, most definitely. It was one of those, everybody got together. And it's funny, it was always new in the sunroom. If the blinds were open, come on in, it was ready. And then when you walked through the sunroom, there was the kitchen, and she was usually cooking in the kitchen. So we couldn't wait to get in the kitchen to hang out there and see her and see everybody.
Nibble on some of the food while she's cooking.
She'd always give us just a little bit and not let us know, but that's it. Get back.
And probably a pitcher of sweet tea.
Always that and lemonade. We were big lemonade drinkers. So she always made it fresh.
Wow.
But it was, that was, to me, the perfect life.
Yeah.
The perfect life.
Well, understand all that. How did the family dynamics change once your grandparents?
Sure, drastically. My dad was 32 at the time, and he was the one on that Monday morning walked in and found them. So he came in to check to see how they were. Hey, good morning. And when he opened the door, he could see my grandfather's feet in the kitchen. So you think about a guy that's 32 years old that's never lived more than a block away from his parents, walks in and finds them both brutally, savagely murdered. You can take a picture of him the day before and then a picture probably 2 weeks later, and you never know it's the same person. We ended up moving to another county, Madison County, which is a connecting county from there. But he was never the same again, which affected my family. We'll go with that first. With my mother, she had to deal with a guy that was basically dead. I mean, he wanted to die. That's all you heard him talk about. I want to die. I don't want to be here. But he still tried to do stuff. He was a great dad. I mean, I don't want to say that. I had a younger sister. She was young enough. She didn't really know what was going on. I had just got saved in February of that year. So my world was kind of rocked because I thought, man, I got saved. Everything's supposed to be good. Life's good. And then, the murder happened. I see my dad falling apart. We moved to another county. I'm, in school. So now I'm going to a different school. And it was just a big dose of reality of change.
At 16.
At 16.
That's a lot for anybody, but at 16.
Yeah. And then, so my uncle, which is the oldest, and again, we'll get more into it. He actually heard, he was outside using the bathroom. Just went out to, it was a pretty day. He heard what he thought was firecrackers, and we found out that was the shots that had actually killed him. He has 2 kids. His youngest daughter was supposed to spend the night that night. And about 8:00, for God above, she decided she was going to go home, or she would have been there that evening. So a little bit of, I don't say survivor's guilt, but I was wondering why, for her, because she was young. She was probably at that time 7, 8. I mean, just young. And then Bobby, which is my uncle, well, I could have heard it. Maybe I could have done something, or why wasn't I there to stop it? Dad, well, I'm always there. Why didn't they call? And then at the beginning, we knew one of the people that did it. At the time, we didn't know that. So it was a lot of finger pointing, questioning. It did bring all of us closer.
Good.
If that's possible, because we had a common enemy, a common bond. We knew what everybody was going through. So it was hard. You had to lean on each other a little bit more, but then it made us a little bit harder too.
I was going to say I was nodding my head and said good, because death usually brings out the worst or the best in a family. Yeah. And there's not a lot of in between. Mm-hmm. And I think we've all experienced both sides of that. So that's probably a good thing, that too. So I guess in your family, do you all talk about the crime? Especially because we're going to, toward the end of the podcast, we're going to talk about what's not happening. But do you all talk about it?
We do, yeah. It's not taboo. Okay. It's mentioned on a regular basis. I have a son that's 30. He knows all about it. He knows the details. And as we'll get into, when you go through all the retrials and the court dates and all that stuff, it's constantly brought up to you anyhow. But no, it's something we still, the bad part is that we've lost, one of my dad's passed away. One of the brothers, Uncle Ronnie's passed away, and then we actually lost a great-grandchild has passed away, Peyton. So 3 of us never got to see the justice of actually see it. And, the one thing we've always talked about, we're going to keep fighting until we get to see it.
Problem with the system is that when we talk about how long this stuff takes, is it actually denies that for people who have that interest in that too. So you were 16 when this happened. How did you learn about it, and how was it described to you?
Sure. What was interesting, that summer, I had came up to Nicholasville. We're in Jessamine County, Nicholasville. My mother's grandparents lived up here and they owned a construction business. And that summer, I thought, you know what? I'm going to go up there and work for them and learn a little bit about it. And they were building one of the factories here in town. And I went to work that morning. I remember it plain as day. I was listening to one of the radio stations, and it was a call-in. Named the 4 people on Mount Rushmore, and we were trying to hurry and call to get into it. And I heard my grandfather pick up the phone, which would have been my mom's dad. And he's like, oh, no. And I was like, did you not get through? Did you not get through? I'm still calling. Yeah. He's like, you need to come here. And and you could tell in his voice something was drastic. Good. And I'm like, what? And he says, I need you to sit down. And I'm like, no, I'm good. You know, what is it? Just tell me. And he's like, your grandparents have been murdered. And I just kind of froze. I'm like, huh? He said, come on, he called my grandmother, Mommy. So we got to get Mommy. We got to get you down there. And I'm like, where's Dad? Where's Mom? He said, I don't know all the details. We've got to get you there. That was the longest, probably 45 minutes, hour, I don't know, hour and a half probably. Honestly, I don't remember a whole lot of the drive up there because they kept saying, are you okay? Are you okay? What are you thinking? And I don't really remember.
I think you just can't process it. Like, it can't be real.
Yeah, I'm like, we live in, a town with, the county's got one stoplight in the whole county. So, it's still, there. So it was just kind of like, I don't know. I remember pulling up exactly what happened when I pulled up, who I saw. But, the first week probably at work. And then on that Monday, there'll be the second week. Starting that second week, you get the phone call, and then your whole life is changed from then.
Mm.
So when your dad went in and found them,
mm-hmm.
I guess at first he saw your grandpa's feet. So,
mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe is he thinking he's fallen but then I guess the further he gets in, he finds your
grandmother. So basically what happened, every morning he would stop. They had like I said, the post, at the time, the grocery store was closed. So he had the post office and the gas station. And earlier we mentioned the blinds being closed. And he stopped in and seen Bobby and said, hey, have you seen Mom and them? And he's like, no, the blinds are closed. And he said, that's all, maybe they're not feeling good. Let me go check on them. So he walked over and he knocked on the glass door. And the way it was, you walked into a sunroom. And at the end of the sunroom was the step up into the kitchen. So you could kind of see into the kitchen. Granny was always she'd get preoccupied and you could scare her. So when he knocked on the door, he said, Mommy, it's me. Don't let me scare you. And he took about 3 steps in, and that's when he saw Papa's feet. He'd been gagged, tied, bound, beat, pistol whipped, and then shot. And he ran to him, got on top of him, and he knew he was gone. But he's, Daddy, no. And he said, all I can think of, where's Mommy? Well, it was a long hallway. You had the dining room, a living room, 2 spare bedrooms on the left, a bathroom, and then the master bedroom was in the back. He goes running down the hall hollering for her and saw what nobody should ever have to see. She was bound, hand and feet, behind her back, laid down on top of the bed, and was shot twice. The first one, we found out later, didn't kill her. The second one did, but she'd always collected 4-leaf clovers and put them in her Bible. And they had asked her if they thought she was going to be lucky and if it would save her when they shot and killed her.
Oh, Lord.
Oh.
So he don't remember for sure how long he was under. It wasn't long, but he said, God, I can't let Bobby see. So he goes running out the sliding or the sunroom door. Bobby, they've killed him. They've killed him, Bobby. They've killed him. Bobby comes running, and he was screaming so loud they couldn't understand what Dad was trying to say, and he kept holding him. And then some other people got him, coming around, and nobody else got to go in. So he was the only one that saw it. But that was every night for the rest of his life. He died in 2002, so 17 years later, he had that nightmare. There's not a night that he slept that he didn't relive that 5 minutes of going in.
Wow. So when you arrived with your other grandparents,
mm-hmm.
I guess, did you go to their house or did
so
you
we pulled up? Yeah. So basically we went home, got my grandmother from my mother's side. We drive there. As you come down the hill, there's probably a couple houses, and it's probably a half-mile stretch. There's people lined up both sides of the road. There's probably 20 cop cars. There's news stations. Across the road's full of hundreds of people. And Greyhawk probably has 100, 120. At the time, I think McKee had 400 people. And they had to be, everybody in the neighborhood had to be, in the county had to be there. We pulled up in front of the post office, and I went to open the door, and Dad just come running. And he's like, Mark, they killed him. And I'm like, who? And he's like, both of them, Mommy and Daddy's gone. And then my mom came out. She was bawling. Dad just kind of fell. So I was more worried about, okay, how can I get, what can I do? And I'm like, what happened? And he's like, I don't know. They did it. And then that's when I found out about the reality of the news world. They were trying to get in for videos and pictures. And I'm like, really? I became probably a little bit of a problem child during that little bit, just because I'm like, quit effing filming.
Yeah.
Turn the cameras. This is private. We don't want you here. Yeah. We don't want this. And then it was trying to help other people. By that time, my other aunt and uncles had showed up. And it was just kind of, we were all sitting in the garage. They'd locked the garage. We were all sitting in there. The coroner, a bunch of the detectives and police were all there. And of course, they wanted to ask a bunch of questions. And then all we were trying to do is figure out who and why. That was we knew they were gone. So the next was, who could it be? Why did they do it? How did it happen?
Yes.
That brutality,
to take the time to bind them up like that.
The one thing that was hardest for me that Christmas in 84, I'd bought, back then boom boxes were big. Yeah. Well, my grandparents, they weren't boom box people, but I bought them just a little bit one speaker radio. And the cord that they used to tie my grandpa up with was from that radio. Oh, it had sat in the kitchen, and they'd ripped the cord out and tied him up and shoved a stocking down his throat. And he had always told us, if you ever need cash, I got some cold cash. And we always, Papa, you're crazy. We don't need anything. Growing up in the Depression, he always liked to keep a little bit on him, not enough to flaunt, but he dealt in used cars, guns, cars, whatever. So if he could trade, he always wanted to have some cash. Well, we found out after this, he kept in styrofoam cups lots of money in the freezer.
Wow.
And that was his cold cash he'd always tell us about. And when they came in, I don't know if you want to get into that part of it now, but he put up a fight. Yeah. He tried to stop it, but he couldn't quite get there.
So you all must have known that whoever did this had to know they had money. So it wasn't a complete stranger just passing through.
It's one of those that it sounds bad, but everybody knew they had money, but not the arrogance of like you see some people nowadays.
Flaunting cash.
Yeah, it was like, okay, Ed and them, if the bank says no, go to them, they'll help you out. They didn't flaunt it. He didn't drive big fancy cars, didn't have fancy stuff. But between the stores and him doing on cars and stuff, people knew there was money there. So it opened it up to where you thought, it could be anybody.
Yeah.
We don't know. But then you're up in the middle of nowhere. So you're kind of like, well, how would anybody know to do that? So there was a lot goes through your mind.
Yeah.
It does open doors. There's an old saying, find the motive and manage the case.
Yeah.
Because in Kentucky, you don't have to prove what somebody's motivation is, but it is what directs the case. So, well, let's go there. So with this horrific thing, and you've offered some details on it, and again, I'm sorry that your family even had to go with something that awful. The police arrive. They start looking at it. Take us down that road. Did you all have some suspicions at some point? Did the police have suspicions? Did the two come together? And how long did it take from their death to when you all learned? Just take us through as much as you can.
So a little bit of backstory too. My uncle, Fred Hayes at the time, was sheriff in Jackson County and had been for a long time. Then I had a cousin, Paul Hayes, a state trooper, that was in command of the post out of London. So we had some insight to some of the stuff that was going on, but as far as who did it at the time, we had no idea. You think of some people that may be in the county, well, that was a bad boy or that was a bad something, but would they go through this far? And because of the brutality, there was no sign of forced entry. We found out later what had happened. Well, basically, the goodness of their heart's what killed them. Yeah. They came to the door and said they'd ran out of gas. We let us come in, come inside. And that's how they got in, because we knew one of them. But going through it all, that was probably the hardest part, because you know, the police are constantly asking you, what about this? What about this? And then every week you're asking them, do you got any leads? You know, there were hardly no fingerprints. There was hardly anything left behind. The only thing that we know that was left behind was the lock to the back door. The sliding glass door was left outside, but it wasn't found until about 4 o'clock the next day. So there's no fingerprint. It was in the backyard, but there's no fingerprints because the sun was out that day. Nothing was showing. So honestly, if it hadn't have been for their mistake in another murder, we may not have never known.
Wow.
No, they actually came through the sunroom, which is on the front.
Mm-hmm.
Once they did the murder, they ran out the back door.
I got you.
So there were 3 involved. One waited in the van to be the lookout. 2 went in because one knew my grandparents, so he was going to help them get in. And then the muscle behind it went in with him. Then after they did the killings, they ran out the back door, and obviously the latch must have been locked on the back door. They ran out as they was running, carrying the money, jewelry, guns, and dropped it. And then got in the car, and then they drove to London, got on 75, and actually took the guns apart, threw them into Laurel Lake as they were driving across the river.
What's the purpose of taking the guns if you're going to take them apart and throw them away?
The ones they used to murder. They kept some of the other ones. Yeah, so the ones they used to murder, they wiped down, took them apart, threw them into and they never were found. Those weapons were never found.
So go back again. Now I'm intrigued on what cracked the case, because you said that if it hadn't been for making a mistake in
another murder. I was asking the same thing. I was thinking, was it before or after, and how?
So it was actually after. In August of that year, there was a big murder case that got a lot of attention statewide. A college student named Tammy Acker, and her dad was Dr. Acker in Letcher County. And these 3 monsters had come up with a plan. They basically went through all the money that they got from Papa and Granny's and decided that, hey, that worked really good. We've heard this guy's got a lot of money. We're going to go get him. And they thought Dr. Acker would be home by himself. So they go to Letcher County. They pose as FBI agents, tell them that they're there to investigate a case. All 3 go in this time. Just so happens Tammy, the daughter's there, who was a UK student, which caught them by surprise. They torture, beat, and thought they had killed both of them. They took Tammy to the back, and she gave them everything that she knew that was there. Dr. Acker had a safe, because that's where he ran his doctor's practice and everything from. And they got the combination of the safe, said, just don't kill nobody, don't kill nobody. And Epperson and Hodge, which are the 2 that killed my grandparents, Donald T. Bartley was the 3rd. They said, okay, we did the last one, you get to kill this one. So Hodge says, I'll go take care of the girl. He stabbed her so many times that the last time that he stabbed her, when she was on the ground, the knife went about 3 inches into the floor. And it took 2 cops to get it out of it. Bartley starts choking Dr. Acker just with a phone cord. The phone rings. It scares him. Dr. Acker's unconscious. They take off running with 3 bags of money, which ended up being a couple $1 million, get into the car and take off. When Dr. Acker wakes up after he finds his daughter, calls the police, and as he started giving descriptions, then the ball started rolling. Luckily, we had a real good detective. Once the description came, we didn't know they'd murdered our grandparents, but one of the names was Roger Dale Epperson. The Epperson name in our family meant a lot because my grandfather's best friend was Eb Epperson, which he was honorary pallbearer at my grandfather's funeral, and his son is the one that murdered my grandparents.
You're kidding. Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police Podcast merch store where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police Podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.